Barbara Hale confessed it all in the note she left behind that changes everything. They found a note after she died, hidden away, untouched for years. It wasn't meant for Hollywood, it wasn't meant for the press, it was meant for the people who thought they knew her, and inside that note, Barbara Hale confessed something that changed how we see her forever. Before we get there, we have to go back to where it all began. Barbara Hale was born on April 18, 1922, in DeKalb, Illinois, a small Midwestern town that didn't know it was raising a future Hollywood legend. The world she came into wasn't glamorous. It was gray, dusty, and shaped by the Great Depression. Families were struggling, money was scarce. But Barbara's family, her father Luther Ezra Hale and mother Wilma Culvin Hale, taught her something that money could never buy: quiet strength. As a child, Barbara wasn't loud or flashy. She didn't dream of fame or red carpets. She drew, she painted, she spent hours alone sketching faces, imagining stories behind every pair of eyes she drew. Back then, nobody could have guessed that one day the world would be doing the same thing to her. When she graduated high school, she didn't head west chasing stardom like so many others. Instead, she enrolled at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts, determined to become an artist. But life has a strange way of redirecting people right when they least expect it. One day, a local photographer asked Barbara to model for a student art project. She agreed, shyly at first. But when the photo developed, something happened. Everyone who saw it said the same thing: "Who is she?" There was something in her presence, not just beauty, but warmth, a calm power that pulled people in without her even trying. Soon that photograph made its way to someone who mattered, and before she knew it, Barbara Hale, the quiet girl from Illinois, was on a train heading to Hollywood. But Hollywood in the 1940s wasn't a dreamland. It was a battlefield. Studios were ruthless, actors were disposable, and for a young woman with no connections, it was almost impossible to survive unless you had something special. Barbara had that something. When she first walked into RKO Pictures, no one expected much. But the moment the cameras rolled, something shifted. She didn't act, she became. She could turn simple dialogue into something magnetic, something human. Casting directors couldn't explain it, but they knew they were looking at someone who had what every producer in Hollywood wanted: authenticity. And just like that, Barbara Hale, the girl who once painted faces, became the face that Hollywood couldn't forget. By the mid-1940s, Barbara Hale wasn't just another name on a studio roster. She was becoming the quiet storm that directors whispered about. Her first real break came when she appeared in Higher and Higher, 1943, alongside none other than Frank Sinatra. The film was light, musical, charming, and it introduced audiences to something new: a woman who didn't need to shout to be noticed. Barbara didn't steal scenes. She owned them through silence, through the way she listened, through the way her eyes seemed to say what the script didn't. Hollywood audiences were used to flash. Barbara brought depth. In an era when female characters were written as fragile or flirtatious, she radiated quiet intelligence. You didn't just watch her, you believed her. Then came The Window in 1949, a tense psychological thriller that showed her dramatic side. Critics began using words like graceful, subtle, and commanding. And studio executives finally realized they weren't dealing with a typical actress. They were dealing with someone who could make ordinary characters unforgettable. Co-stars loved working with her. Robert Young, James Stewart, Frank Sinatra all spoke about her professionalism and kindness. She wasn't part of the gossip, the parties, the scandals that consumed the golden age of Hollywood. While others chased the spotlight, Barbara Hale became the spotlight by being exactly who she was: calm, grounded, and real. But Hollywood is a strange place. It rewards talent, but it also tests it. And for Barbara, the test would come not through a scandal or a headline, but through a role that would define her for the rest of her life, a role that would make her immortal, a role that would tie her forever to another soul, Raymond Burr, in a partnership that would outlast fame itself. But before the cameras rolled on Perry Mason, Barbara Hale had already learned what few in Hollywood ever do: that fame is fleeting, but truth, loyalty, and love, those are eternal. Hollywood has a strange way of finding people right when they're ready. even if they don't know it yet. For Barbara Hale, that moment came in 1957. She was already respected, a dependable actress with over a decade of film work behind her. But in a city that moves fast and forgets faster, Barbara was at a crossroads. The big movie offers had slowed. The faces around her were getting younger, louder, flashier. And then came the call that would change everything. A new television project was being cast. A courtroom drama, simple, low budget, not expected to last more than a season. The show was called Perry Mason. Most actresses turned it down. Who wants to play a secretary, they said. But Barbara saw something no one else did, because Della Street wasn't written like any ordinary secretary. She was sharp, confident, and completely essential to the story. When Barbara Hale stepped into that role, something clicked. The moment cameras rolled, the quiet grace she carried her whole life turned into power, and then he walked in. Raymond Burr, tall, commanding, deep voice that could fill a room without ever needing to shout. He was already a presence, someone who didn't act. He occupied the space. The first time Barbara and Raymond shared a scene, the energy on set changed. Crew members would later say it felt real. There was no forced chemistry, just a mutual understanding between two people who immediately trusted each other. From the very beginning, Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr created something that television had never seen before. A man and woman working side by side, equals, partners, not lovers, not rivals, but something more profound. Their rhythm was flawless. She anticipated his lines before he said them. He looked at her with an unspoken respect. The connection was so authentic that audiences around the world began to wonder, is this real? But it wasn't just acting. It was the start of a bond that would last for nearly 40 years. Week after week, millions tuned in to see Della Street and Perry Mason solve impossible cases. Yet behind every scene, there was something deeper happening. A real friendship, a real connection, quietly forming behind the script. Barbara's portrayal of Della was revolutionary for its time. In the 1950s, most women on TV were housewives, comic relief, or secondary to men. But Della Street was different. She was the brain beside the genius, the calm inside the storm. And for that, Barbara Hale didn't just become a star, she became a symbol of quiet strength, professionalism, and integrity. By the end of Perry Mason's first season, Barbara was no longer just the secretary. She was the heartbeat of the show. In 1959, she won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Supporting Actress. But the award wasn't just for Della Street. It was for everything Barbara represented. The fans adored her. Her peers respected her. And Raymond Burr, he trusted her like no one else. They say some bonds are written into destiny. And for Barbara and Raymond, Perry Mason was only the beginning. While the world watched Barbara Hale light up television screens as Della Street, few knew the story of the life she lived when the cameras stopped rolling. Because Barbara wasn't just an actress. She was a wife, a mother, and the rare kind of Hollywood figure who didn't need the noise of fame to feel alive. Her love story began years earlier, back in 1945, on the set of the Western West of the Pecos. It was there she met Bill Williams, a young, rugged actor with a calm smile and the kind of steady charm that reminded her of home. Bill, whose real name was Herman August Wilhelm Katt, wasn't just handsome. He was kind, grounded, and refreshingly real in a business built on illusion. Barbara and Bill's connection was immediate. They spent long hours filming under the desert sun, laughing between takes, sharing stories about their small-town roots and dreams for the future. Hollywood romances were often fleeting, a spark today, gone tomorrow. But this was different. On June 22nd, 1946, they married in a modest ceremony surrounded by close friends. No red carpets, no press, just two people who found something real in a place that rarely allowed it. And for nearly 50 years, they stayed that way. Loyal, private, unshaken by Hollywood's chaos. They built a family together, 2 daughters, Jody and Juanita, and 1 son, William Katt, who would one day follow in their footsteps and become a television star himself, known for the greatest American hero. To Barbara, family wasn't a break from her career. It was her reason for her career. She often turned down film roles if it meant being away from her kids for too long. While others chased fame, Barbara chased dinner with her family. While others sought headlines, she sought quiet. Friends who visited her home described warmth, Laughter, books, the smell of coffee and paint, remnants of her old art school days. She and Bill Williams were known as one of Hollywood's most enduring couples, not because they were perfect, but because they chose each other again and again through every storm. Behind the camera, Barbara remained true to herself. She didn't let the fame change her voice, her values, or her marriage. And yet, even in that piece, there was one connection that existed outside her family, one friendship that would shape the rest of her life. A friendship with Raymond Burr, her Perry Mason co-star, a man who, in many ways, became her emotional counterpart. Theirs was not a romance, but something far more complicated and much more meaningful. Because while Bill Williams was her anchor at home, Raymond Burr was her compass at work. Her confidant, her constant, the one person who truly understood the weight of what fame demanded. And when she later wrote the words in that note, the words no one expected to see, they revealed that this friendship, this connection, wasn't just part of her career. It was the soul of it, the years of success, the applause, the awards. They were the surface. But what Barbara Hale felt quietly behind the scenes was something far deeper, something she carried until the very end. There are stories Hollywood tells, and there are stories it hides. And this one, the one between Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr, was one of the most whispered about in the industry. For decades, they worked side by side on Perry Mason, 271 episodes, countless hours on set. But what people didn't see was what happened after the director yelled, "Cut." Raymond Burr, for all his power and presence on screen, lived a life wrapped in secrecy. He was private, guarded, even mysterious. Rumors surrounded him, stories of a lost wife, of war, of heartbreak. But behind those rumors stood one unwavering truth. Barbara Hale knew him better than anyone. While the world saw Perry Mason and Della Street, behind closed doors there was Raymond and Barbara. Two souls quietly holding each other up through Hollywood's storms. Their friendship wasn't loud. It wasn't built on fame or flirtation. It was something purer, something unspoken. Crew members often noticed it. The small glances, the way they could communicate with a single look. When Raymond struggled with exhaustion or pain from the grueling shooting schedules, Barbara was there, steady, patient, protective. And when Barbara lost her husband, Bill Williams, in 1992, it was Raymond who called her every night to make sure she wasn't alone. But what made their relationship so hauntingly beautiful was that it existed in the gray area. Not romantic, not platonic, but something only they understood. In interviews, Barbara Hale always referred to Raymond with a kind of reverence. She once said, "He was my hero, my real hero. It wasn't about Perry Mason. It was about the man behind the role." Because Raymond Burr carried secrets, and Barbara Hale carried them with him. When reporters asked about his private life, she never revealed anything. Not once. She protected him, even when it meant confusing the press, even when it meant letting people believe rumors. That's loyalty, that's love, not in the Hollywood sense, but in the human one. When Perry Mason ended in 1966, their connection didn't. They stayed in touch, writing letters, calling, meeting for lunch when schedules allowed. And then, in 1985, when Perry Mason returned as a series of TV movies, they reunited, older, wiser, but still with that same spark. The chemistry hadn't faded. If anything, it was stronger. Every look they shared on screen felt charged with history, trust, and unspoken emotion. And yet, beneath it all, there was something they both knew but never said aloud, a truth too intimate for interviews, too sacred for tabloids. When Raymond Burr passed away in 1993, Barbara was devastated. She didn't appear on camera for weeks. She didn't give statements. But at his private memorial, she was seen sitting quietly near the back, clutching a small piece of paper. Something folded, worn, like it had been read too many times. What no one realized then was that the paper she held wasn't from Raymond, it was for him. Years later, after Barbara Hale passed away in 2017, her family began sorting through her personal belongings, old scripts, letters, photographs, awards. In one of her journals, tucked carefully between two yellowed pages, they found an envelope. On it, in faded ink, was a single name, Raymond. It wasn't dated, it wasn't sealed, and inside was a handwritten note that no one had ever seen before. The handwriting was delicate, the same graceful script Barbara had used for decades. And the message inside was both heartbreaking and breathtaking. You were the safest place I ever knew. You never asked me to be anyone but myself. When the cameras stopped, the world quieted and everyone went home. You were still there. You were my balance, my peace. I wish the world knew you the way I did, not as Perry Mason, but as the kind, lonely man who gave everyone else strength while carrying his own silence. You never said goodbye, not really, but I still feel you here. And when I close my eyes, the courtroom lights are still on, and we're still there. You and me, Della and Perry, Barbara and Raymond. Always the note wasn't sensational. It wasn't scandalous, but it was real. It revealed a love story that didn't need to break rules or headlines. A story about two people who found solace in each other's presence. Not romance, but something deeper, a kind of soul connection that didn't fit neatly into Hollywood scripts. And maybe that's what makes it so haunting, because for decades, people had speculated about what really went on between Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr. But the truth was far more profound than gossip could ever capture. They weren't lovers in secret. They were two people who understood the loneliness of fame, the fragility of success, and the beauty of loyalty. The note stayed private for years. It wasn't meant for headlines. It was meant for peace. A goodbye written not in grief, but in gratitude. And that's how Barbara Hale lived her life. Quietly, gracefully, without the need to explain or defend what others would never understand. She wasn't just an actress. She was an artist of the soul, painting emotion through silence, through stillness, through truth. Her story reminds us that not every great love is romantic. Some are born in the spaces between words, in the shared glances across a courtroom set, in the letters that never needed to be sent. When the lights went down and Hollywood moved on, one thing remained untouched. The eternal connection between Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr. Not a scandal, not a secret, but something far rarer. A love written in silence and remembered forever. When Barbara Hale passed away on January the 26th, 2017, Hollywood barely made a sound. No breaking headlines, no massive tributes, just a quiet announcement tucked between louder stories about newer stars. And yet, the silence was fitting, because Barbara never lived for applause. She lived for meaning, for loyalty, for moments that mattered when no one was watching. In a world obsessed with fame, she became famous for not needing it. But here's the thing. While the world might forget, time doesn't. Time remembers the ones who move it. Barbara Hale changed the way television saw women. And she did it without ever demanding credit. Before Perry Mason, women on TV were written as decoration, background noise to the male lead. But Barbara Hale, as Della Street, rewrote that script, silently, elegantly, and permanently. Every modern strong female lead, every woman who stands shoulder to shoulder with a man on screen, owes something to her, to the way she stood beside Raymond Burr, not behind him, to the way she made intelligence look graceful and power look human. When people spoke about her, they didn't talk about scandals or gossip. They talked about presence. William Catt, her son, once said in an interview, "My mom didn't need to be loud. You just felt her when she walked into a room. She had that kind of peace that everyone else wanted, and maybe that was her greatest gift. She showed the world that true power doesn't need to shout." After her passing, fans began to revisit Perry Mason, not out of nostalgia, but to feel that calm, that certainty, that timeless rhythm of justice she helped create. It wasn't just about solving cases, it was about watching two people, Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr, bring dignity to every frame. And as people rediscovered the show, something fascinating happened. Younger audiences, born decades after the series ended, started asking the same question: who was Della Street? They didn't realize that they weren't just asking about a character. They were asking about a woman who quietly shaped television history. A woman who turned restraint into art and grace into rebellion. Even now, when reruns play late at night and those black and white images flicker across the screen, something about Barbara's presence still feels alive. That soft smile, that calm confidence, the way she could say everything without saying a word. That's not just acting. That's immortality. Because the truth is, legends don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they whisper. And if you listen closely, Barbara Hale's whisper is still echoing through every woman who learned that strength doesn't always roar. There's a moment near the end of the final Perry Mason movie where Della Street, played by Barbara Hale, looks across the courtroom at Perry Mason one last time. There's no dialogue, just a look, a soft, almost imperceptible smile. And if you've watched every episode, if you've followed their story for decades, you know exactly what that look means. It's goodbye, without saying goodbye. That's how Barbara Hale lived, quietly, truthfully, and with grace. She never needed the chaos, never needed to prove her worth. Her legacy wasn't measured in fame. It was measured in feeling, and that's why when her family found that letter to Raymond Burr, it didn't feel like a secret. It felt like the missing final scene. The note wasn't about unspoken love. It was about completion. It was about two people who had walked through an entire lifetime of fame, expectation, and pressure, and still managed to remain human. That's the real story of Barbara Hale. Not the glitz, not the glamour, but the humanity that refused to fade, even when the lights went out. Think about it. In an industry that eats people alive, Barbara stayed kind. While others reinvented themselves every few years to stay relevant, she stayed herself. And somehow that made her timeless. She didn't chase attention. She earned respect. She didn't crave adoration. She created legacy. And when the final credits rolled, she left behind something that fame could never touch: dignity. The world is louder now, faster, more distracted. But stories like hers, quiet, sincere, rooted in loyalty, cut through all the noise, because deep down, every one of us wants what she had. Real connection, real purpose, real peace. In the end, Barbara Hale's story isn't about Hollywood at all. It's about finding light in a world that keeps dimming it. It's about knowing that some relationships, the true ones, don't end when someone leaves. They just change form. Somewhere, in the archives of television history, Perry Mason and Della Street are still standing side by side, solving one last case, bathed in black and white light, unbothered by time. And if you listen closely, maybe you can still hear Barbara's voice, soft, steady, unshaken, whispering the same truth she lived by her entire life. You don't have to be loud to be remembered. You just have to be real. If there was ever a friendship that blurred the line between fiction and reality, it was Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr. To the audience, they were Della Street and Perry Mason, the unbeatable legal duo solving impossible cases with calm intelligence and quiet chemistry. But behind the cameras, something much deeper was unfolding. When Hale first stepped onto the Perry Mason set in 1957, she expected just another TV job. A few seasons, maybe some success. What she didn't expect was to meet a man who would redefine what loyalty, trust, and emotional connection meant for the rest of her life. Raymond Burr, tall, commanding, and mysterious, was already known for his intense screen presence. He had that voice, deep, steady, unshakable, the kind that could make a courtroom go silent with a single word. But what the public didn't see was the man behind that voice, the kindness, the humor, the incredible patience, and Barbara saw that man. From the very first table read, the chemistry was undeniable. Not the kind that flirts or plays for the camera, but the kind that anchors two people together. Directors noticed it. Crew members whispered about it. Viewers could feel it, even through the black and white glow of their TV screens. There was a moment, one that fans still talk about, when Della Street glances up at Perry Mason after he wins another impossible case. It's a look of admiration, gratitude, and something unspoken. That wasn't acting. That was Barbara. And Burr, he looked back the same way, as if they shared a secret the world could never quite name. Their friendship wasn't built in the glamour of Hollywood parties or studio press tours. It was built during the long, quiet hours between takes. While others went to lunch, they'd sit and talk about life, about faith, about the weight of fame, and the loneliness that comes with it. Barbara once said in a rare interview, "We didn't have to act the friendship, you could feel it." And that's what made their connection almost mystical. Two people, both private by nature, both misunderstood by the media, found something real in a town built on illusion. As the series grew into a phenomenon, millions tuning in every week, the spotlight on them intensified. Tabloids speculated. Fans wondered if there was more to their bond. But neither Barbara nor Raymond ever fueled the rumors. They didn't need to explain it. They just kept showing up, side by side, case after case, year after year. And in an industry obsessed with image, their silence said more than any headline ever could. What they had wasn't a secret affair. It was something purer, rarer, a spiritual partnership built on respect and a kind of mutual understanding that words could never fully capture. Barbara often described Burr as her rock. He was the person she leaned on when Hollywood's demands became too heavy, when self-doubt crept in, when the cameras stopped rolling. He believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. And she gave him something in return that no one else could: unwavering trust. When Burr grew sick years later, Barbara didn't walk away. She stayed, quietly, consistently, until the very end. That wasn't Hollywood love. That was human love, the kind that never needs an audience. When Perry Mason ended in 1966, the world thought it was over, that Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr would move on to new roles, new lives, new stories. But they couldn't, because their story wasn't finished. Nearly 20 years later, in the mid-1980s, television brought them back together for a new series of Perry Mason TV movies. And when Barbara Hale walked onto that set again, older, wiser, still carrying the same quiet strength, it felt like time itself had waited for her. The cameras rolled. Burr entered the room as Mason. She turned, smiled, and said, "Good to see you again, Chief." It was like no time had passed at all. The magic, that impossible chemistry, was still there, untouched by decades. But now it carried more weight. This wasn't just two actors reuniting for nostalgia. This was two lifelong friends, scarred by time and loss, returning to a place that felt like home. And audiences felt that. The ratings soared. People who had grown up with the original show tuned in just to see them together again. Even younger generations, who didn't know the backstory, sensed that something about their connection was real. Behind the scenes, things weren't easy. Raymond Burr's health was declining, but he refused to stop working. He once told producers, "As long as Barbara's here, I can keep doing this." And Barbara, she was there every single day, calm, poised, loyal to the end. When Burr passed away in 1993, Hale was heartbroken. Later, her family would reveal that she never fully recovered from that loss. She would often talk about hearing his voice as if he was still there, guiding her through scenes, through life. And yet she kept going. For more than a decade after his death, she continued to carry Perry Mason's legacy, not as a burden but as a tribute. To him, to their friendship, to the truth that love doesn't always fit into simple categories. When asked in one of her final interviews what Raymond Burr meant to her, Barbara paused for a long time before answering. Then she said softly, "He was my strength when I wasn't sure I had any left." We never needed to say it. We just knew that was Barbara Hale, never loud, never performative, just honest. Her relationship with Raymond Burr remains one of Hollywood's most misunderstood, not because it was scandalous, but because it wasn't. It was rare. It was real. It was built on a kind of loyalty that's almost extinct in modern fame. Even now, decades later, their story feels like a lost chapter from a different Hollywood, one where grace mattered more than gossip and friendship meant forever. So the next time you see Perry Mason flicker across your screen, remember, you're not just watching a show. You're witnessing a living promise between Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr. A promise that even time, death, and silence couldn't break. In a city built on illusions, where every romance seems scripted and every smile rehearsed, Barbara Hale found something real. It was 1945, the golden age of Hollywood. Studios ruled everything, movie stars shone brighter than ever, and scandal sold faster than truth. But on the set of the Western West of the Pecos, fate had a different kind of script waiting for her. That's where she met Bill Williams. He wasn't your typical Hollywood playboy. Bill Williams, born Herman August Wilhelm Katt, was tall, rugged, and quietly confident. He had that classic clean-cut charm, but behind his smile was something rare in Hollywood: humility. Barbara noticed that first. While others competed for attention, Bill didn't have to. He had the kind of presence that didn't shout. It calmed, and maybe that's what drew her in. Because Barbara Hale had spent her early career surrounded by flashing lights and polished egos, but this man felt real. During the long days of shooting in the blistering desert heat, Barbara and Bill found themselves talking more than acting. Between takes, they'd share stories about childhood, about dreams, about what scared them most, about fame. Those quiet moments became the start of something extraordinary. People on set noticed. The chemistry was there, natural, unforced, magnetic, but what made it special wasn't passion alone, it was peace. They made each other feel safe, and in Hollywood, that's almost unheard of. After filming Wrapped, they kept seeing each other. No press headlines, no dramatic affairs, just two people who found comfort in shared simplicity. They married a year later, on June the 22nd, 1946, in a modest ceremony. No golden gowns, no studio sponsorship, no Hollywood spectacle. Just family, faith, and a promise that would outlast every flashbulb. And against every odd, they kept that promise. While the tabloids chased scandals, Barbara Hale and Bill Williams quietly built one of the most enduring marriages in entertainment history. Nearly 50 years of partnership. In an industry where many couldn't survive 5, they worked, they raised children, they supported each other through success and struggle. There were years when Bill's career flourished and Barbara stood by him. Then came the years when she was the star, the Emmy winner, the face on every screen, and he stood by her just the same. It wasn't about competition, it was about respect. Friends would often describe them as Hollywood's most normal couple, and Barbara loved that title, because while others craved attention, they craved peace. In interviews, Barbara once laughed and said, "Bill and I didn't need the spotlight. We had our own little world, and that was enough." And it truly was. Their love didn't live in headlines. It lived in the quiet moments, in the mornings spent making breakfast before a long day of shooting, in the letters sent between film locations, in the way they looked at each other across a crowded set, small, invisible gestures that meant everything. That's the thing about Barbara Hale. She didn't just find love, she built it, brick by brick, with loyalty, patience, and grace. When Bill Williams passed away in 1992, Barbara's world dimmed. But it didn't break, because even in grief, she carried their love like armor. And in every interview afterward, you could still hear it. That unwavering gratitude for the man who made Hollywood feel like home. In the glittering world of movie premieres and flashing cameras, Barbara Hale had a secret. One that shocked people who thought they knew what it meant to be a star. She didn't live for Hollywood, she lived for her family. While other actresses of her time fought for every script, every role, every magazine cover, Barbara fought for dinner at home, bedtime stories, and weekends with her children. Her home in Sherman Oaks wasn't a palace of celebrity excess. It was warm, full of laughter, art supplies, and the smell of home-cooked meals. And in the middle of it all, Barbara was mum. She and Bill Williams had 3 children, daughters Jody and Juanita, and a son, William Cat. And that last name, Cat, would one day make headlines too. Because William didn't just inherit his mother's smile, he inherited her spirit. Years later, he would become famous for his own hit show, The Greatest American Hero. But before fame, he was just a little boy on the Perry Mason set, watching his mum transform into Della Street. Calm, brilliant, unshakable. Barbara didn't hide Hollywood from her kids. She showed them the truth behind it. The hard work, the patience, the self-respect. And that's why her children grew up grounded, not glittering. When Perry Mason returned in the 1980s, Barbara's son William Cat appeared alongside her in several of the television films. It wasn't just a career moment. It was a generational passing of the torch. A mother and son, both actors, both living proof that talent runs deep when it's rooted in love. But behind every success story were the choices Barbara made, the roles she turned down, the opportunities she let go, all because her family came first. She used to say, "I never worried about being forgotten by Hollywood. I just didn't want to be forgotten by my kids," and she never was. In fact, her family adored her, not just as an actress, but as a woman of endless warmth and quiet discipline. When she passed away in 2017, her children didn't speak about awards or fame. They spoke about the nights she read to them, the times she'd stop filming just to make it home for dinner. It's strange. We often talk about legends as if their legacy is made of trophies and headlines, but Barbara Hale's legacy is made of something else entirely. It's made of love, of presence, of balance. It's made of a woman who conquered Hollywood without letting Hollywood conquer her. While the world remembers her as Della Street, her family remembers her as something far greater. A wife, a mother, a friend, the heart of a home that never needed a spotlight to shine. And maybe that's the real reason her story still resonates today. Because in a world obsessed with fame, Barbara Hale proved that the greatest success of all is to be deeply loved by the ones who know you best. There are some people in life who live between two worlds, one of duty and one of connection. Barbara Hale was one of them. On paper, her life seemed simple. Devoted wife to Bill Williams, mother of 3, Emmy-winning actress. But beneath the surface, her heart carried something much more complex. Because while Barbara was deeply in love with her husband, she also shared a bond with Raymond Burr that defied labels. It was emotional, spiritual, almost telepathic. To understand Barbara's heart, you have to understand the world she lived in. Hollywood in the 1950s wasn't a place for nuance. You were expected to fit one mold: the loyal wife, the glamorous star, the perfect woman. But Barbara was more than that. She was loyal, yes. But she was also human. Her connection with Raymond Burr wasn't romantic in the conventional sense. It was bigger than that. He was her mirror, her confidant, her emotional twin, and yet she never betrayed the man she built her life with, Bill Williams. That's the paradox that made Barbara Hale so rare. She could love deeply, twice, without breaking a promise. Those close to her often said that when she was with Bill, she radiated peace. But when she was with Raymond, something else came alive. A spark, a sense of purpose, a shared energy that made her light up in a way few people ever got to see. In interviews, you can hear it in her voice, the way she talked about Burr. It wasn't just admiration, it was reverence. And Burr felt the same. He often said that Barbara wasn't just his co-star, she was his anchor. When his private life grew complicated, when the press speculated and the studios tried to mold him into something he wasn't, Barbara was there, quietly, faithfully. She never asked for anything in return. There's a moment that few people know about. Years after Perry Mason ended, when Burr had withdrawn from Hollywood, sick and tired of the industry's gossip. One afternoon, Barbara drove for hours just to visit him at his home in Sonoma. No cameras, no interviews. Just two old friends sitting in silence, watching the California sunset fade into the hills. No one recorded what they said that day, but Burr's housekeeper later recalled hearing laughter. Soft, gentle, familiar, the kind that only comes from people who truly see each other. That's the kind of connection they had. One that doesn't make the tabloids, but makes a person whole. And maybe that's why Barbara could stay loyal to both men, because she didn't love in halves. She loved in wholes. When Burr passed away in 1993, the world mourned a legend. But Barbara mourned something else, a part of herself. She attended the funeral quietly, away from the cameras, her face calm but her eyes heavy with the kind of grief that doesn't need to be explained. A year later, when asked about Burr in an interview, she simply said, "He was family. Always was, not friend, not colleague, family." That one word said everything. It revealed the truth that Hollywood never could. That Barbara Hale lived a life not divided by love, but defined by it. In the end, her story wasn't about romance or scandal. It was about something deeper, the rare, unshakable bond between souls who meet in one lifetime and recognize each other instantly. She never spoke of it publicly again. She didn't have to, because the proof was already there, in every look, every scene, every moment on screen where Perry Mason and Della Street shared a silence that said more than words ever could. Every legend has an ending, but few leave behind a silence as heavy and as beautiful as Barbara Hale did. By the early 2000s, she had retired fully from acting. Her hair had turned silver, her steps slower, but her eyes, those same clear, knowing eyes, still carried the light of Della Street, the warmth of a mother and the strength of a woman who had lived without regret. Her life had come full circle. She had outlasted the Hollywood era she helped define, the studios, the contracts, the gossip, the fame, all gone, but her presence remained. Friends say that in her final years, Barbara spent her mornings on the porch of her California home, sipping tea surrounded by photographs. Her husband, Bill Williams, her children, and one picture that never left her side, a small black and white photo of Raymond Burr. It sat on her nightstand until the day she died. Those who visited her said she spoke of him often, never dramatically, never with sorrow, just with quiet gratitude. "He always looked out for me," she would say, "even when he wasn't here." Her son, William Catt, once recalled visiting her shortly before her passing. He asked her if she missed Hollywood. The cameras, the fame, the rush of it all. Barbara smiled and said, "No, sweetheart. I had everything I needed right here. Love, family, and stories that still live in people's hearts." That was Barbara Hale. No bitterness, no longing for the past, just a quiet satisfaction that she had lived her truth in a world that often demanded masks. When she passed away on January 26, 2017, the tributes poured in, not from tabloids chasing scandal, but from fans, co-stars, and generations of actors who grew up watching her redefine what it meant to be a woman on screen. They called her Hollywood's Lady of Loyalty. And that title fits perfectly, because in a world that changes overnight, Barbara Hale never did. She remained steady, graceful, loyal, unshakably kind. Even now, her story feels almost impossible by modern standards. A woman who found fame but never lost her humility, who built a marriage that lasted half a century, who shared a bond with a man that defied gossip, gravity, and time. It's no wonder that Perry Mason reruns still air every week, still pulling in millions of viewers, because people aren't just watching courtroom drama. They're watching truth. They're watching what real connection looks like. And somewhere, if there's any justice in the afterlife, Barbara Hale and Raymond Burr are sitting side by side again, calm, smiling, unhurried, solving one last case under the soft glow of studio lights that never fade. That's not fiction. That's legacy. A story not written by Hollywood, but by life itself. In an era where women in Hollywood were expected to be seen but not heard, Barbara Hale did something no one saw coming. She changed the narrative quietly. While the headlines chased the scandalous, the glamorous, the tragic, Barbara was leading a quiet revolution, one that would outlast every tabloid story of her generation. Think about it. The 1950s and 60s, the golden age of television, were also decades ruled by male leads, male writers, male executives. Women were often reduced to stereotypes: the damsel, the secretary, the starlet. But then came Della Street, and with her, everything changed. When Barbara Hale stepped into that role, she refused to play it the way studios expected. She wasn't the flirty assistant or the helpless woman waiting to be saved. She was composed, sharp, professional, equal to Perry Mason in intellect and moral strength, and she did it all without ever raising her voice. There was a subtlety to Barbara's power that audiences didn't just see, they felt. When Della Street spoke, people listened. When she walked into a room, the energy shifted, not because she demanded attention, but because she commanded it. She proved something revolutionary. That quiet confidence can be louder than any scream. At a time when women were told to smile and nod, Barbara's Della raised an eyebrow and changed the tone of an entire generation of storytelling. Every strong, intelligent female character on television today owes something to that foundation. From Olivia Benson in Law and Order, SVU, to Jessica Pearson in Suits, to the calm authority of characters like Miranda Bailey in Grey's Anatomy, the DNA of Della Street runs through them all. But Barbara didn't plan to become a feminist icon. She just was one, naturally, effortlessly, because she lived what she played. On screen, she was Della Street, the woman who always knew what to say, who never faltered even in the face of chaos. Off screen, she was Barbara Hale, a wife, a mother, a professional who balanced family and fame long before it became a buzzword. And that's what made her quietly dangerous in Hollywood's eyes. She didn't need the system to define her. She wasn't fighting for attention. She was earning respect, and she got it from everyone, including the men who worked beside her. Raymond Burr once said in an interview, "Barbara didn't have to demand respect. She just had it. Every man on that set knew she was the smartest person in the room." That's how she changed the game. Not with rebellion, but with grace. Not by breaking rules, but by rewriting them through example. And in a strange twist of irony, that's what made her timeless. Because while other actresses' fame came and went with the decade, Barbara Hale's legacy only grew stronger with each passing year. Even now, her image, that calm poise behind Mason's desk, her eyes sharp yet kind, remains an archetype for strength. She made intelligence beautiful. She made dignity magnetic. She made kindness powerful, and maybe that's the real revolution she started, proving that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and the world listens. When Barbara Hale passed away in 2017, Hollywood didn't just lose an actress. It lost a compass, a moral center, a reminder of what authenticity looks like in an industry that runs on illusion. But her story didn't end there, because the truth about legacy is this: It doesn't fade when the lights go out. It echoes, and Barbara's echo is everywhere. Every time a young actress steps onto a set and demands to be treated as more than decoration, Barbara Hale's influence is there. Quiet, but unyielding. Every time a TV show portrays a woman as calm, clever, and capable without stripping away her humanity, Barbara's spirit is in that scene. Her son, William Catt, once said, "My mum's gift wasn't fame, it was presence. When she walked into a room, everything felt right. And when she left, you knew something good had been there." That's the kind of legacy you can't measure in awards or headlines. It's something deeper, something that lingers in the collective memory. And here's the part that still gives people chills. Perry Mason, decades after its original run, is still watched by millions every week. In an age of streaming, AI, and 10-second videos, people still sit down to watch a black-and-white courtroom drama from the 1950s. Why? Because it's not just nostalgia, it's authenticity. It's that rare energy that feels real because it was. When Barbara Hale looked across that desk at Raymond Burr, when she smiled at him after another victory, viewers could feel that bond, genuine, timeless, true, and that's something no modern show, no algorithm, no artificial charisma can replicate. Barbara Hale's performances remind us that truth never ages. Even younger generations, those who never saw the show live, find themselves drawn to her. On TikTok, YouTube, and fan pages, clips of Della Street are shared daily. Comments flood in. She was elegance personified. She didn't have to say much, her eyes said everything. She's what women on TV used to be, real. And that's when you realize Barbara Hale isn't gone. She's alive in memory, in influence, in the quiet inspiration she still gives to anyone trying to live with both strength and grace. Because in the end, her life wasn't just about acting. It was about balance. The rare ability to live truthfully in a world built on make-believe. She taught us that you can chase dreams without losing your soul. That fame means nothing without integrity. And that love, real love, doesn't need a spotlight to last forever. Barbara Hale didn't leave behind controversy. She left behind character, and that's what makes her story so magnetic in a world that's forgotten how to slow down and feel. So if you ever doubt that quiet goodness still matters, look at her. Look at Della Street. Look at Barbara Hale. Because in the noise of modern fame, her silence still speaks louder than ever. Even as the years crept forward, Barbara Hale never lost the quiet authority that had defined her life. Her home in Sherman Oaks, California, became her sanctuary. A place where Hollywood's chaos never reached, where family reigned, and where the echoes of her decades-long career whispered softly, like a memory you couldn't quite touch, but could always feel. It was here in the final decades of her life that Barbara's true character shone brightest. Away from the bright lights, she chose simplicity, valuing connection over fame, authenticity over applause. And yet her legacy was growing silently like roots spreading deep underground, shaping generations without anyone realizing it. Her children, particularly William Catt, watched in awe as she balanced the memory of Bill Williams, her late husband, with the enduring friendship of Raymond Burr. She held both relationships in her heart with tenderness and care, never choosing fame or attention over loyalty, never sacrificing depth for appearances. Friends and colleagues described her as a woman whose calm could shift the energy in any room. A single glance from Barbara could silence a crowd or soothe a storm. Her dignity wasn't performative. It was inherent, natural, unwavering, even in the face of illness, as she bravely battled chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, in her later years. Barbara never let it define her. She faced it with the same resilience and quiet determination that had carried her through a Hollywood career spanning more than 50 films, decades of television, and the ever-changing tides of fame. Barbara Hale's final years weren't about public accolades or media attention. They were about reflection, about gratitude, about love in its purest, most unspoken form. She continued to mentor, advise, and guide younger actors when she could, not for recognition, but because she believed in passing forward what she had learned, that integrity, loyalty, and compassion were far more valuable than any award or headline. Even after Raymond Burr's passing in 1993, she carried his influence with her, the bond they shared still alive in small gestures, quiet thoughts, and the silent strength she exuded to everyone around her. Barbara's life was proof that the deepest connections often leave no public record, yet they shape the course of an entire lifetime. And then, on January 26, 2017, at the age of 94, Barbara Hale passed peacefully in her home. Her death wasn't sensationalized in headlines or tabloids. It wasn't accompanied by drama. It was quiet, graceful, true to the way she had lived her entire life. Fans, colleagues, and historians alike paused to remember her not for the flash of celebrity, but for the enduring impact of her calm authority, her moral clarity, and her unwavering dedication to both her craft and her loved ones. In her passing, the world saw what those closest to her had always known. Barbara Hale's legacy wasn't just on-screen brilliance. It was living a life of integrity, loyalty, and profound humanity. Barbara Hale's story doesn't end with her passing. It lives on, not just in reruns of Perry Mason or in the awards she won or even in the photographs that line Hollywood history books, but in the lessons she leaves behind. She taught us that power doesn't need to be loud, that respect isn't demanded. It's earned quietly, consistently, through action and integrity. She showed that love doesn't have to be public to be profound, that loyalty can exist beyond romance, beyond headlines, beyond what the world can see. Her bond with Bill Williams redefined what it meant to have a strong marriage in Hollywood. One built on respect, shared laughter, and a deep mutual understanding that outlasted decades. Her relationship with Raymond Burr redefined what it meant to have a friendship that is truly unconditional, one that provides strength, comfort, and inspiration without needing recognition. Through her career, she redefined women's roles on television. Della Street wasn't just a secretary, she was a trailblazer. Intelligent, capable, and unafraid to assert her voice in a male-dominated world. Every time audiences watched her calmly navigate Perry Mason's courtroom victories, they witnessed a woman breaking stereotypes without shouting, leading without arrogance, and winning hearts without sacrificing dignity. Her legacy reaches beyond entertainment. It's a blueprint for living. Value your family more than your fame. Cherish relationships built on loyalty and trust. Lead with intelligence, grace, and subtle strength. Even now, decades after her last performance, Barbara Hale's influence can be felt. Modern actresses cite her as inspiration. Television writers still study Della Street as the archetype of the intelligent female professional. Fans across generations continue to marvel at her calm authority, her warmth, and the quiet magnetism she exuded on every screen. And in her personal life, the lessons are no less profound. She demonstrated that one can love deeply in multiple ways, that one can honor loyalty while maintaining independence, and that a life well lived is measured not in fame or applause, but in relationships, integrity, and impact on others. Barbara Hale didn't just act on screen, she embodied a way of being off-screen. She showed the world that true strength is quiet, that real influence comes from example, and that the most powerful stories are not always loudest in the headlines. Her final note, discovered after her passing, revealed a depth of emotion the public had never fully known. Gratitude, love, and an unbreakable bond with the people who mattered most. Those words remind us that legacy isn't just about the work you leave behind, but the hearts you touch, the lives you guide, and the quiet courage you display every single day. Barbara Hale's life is a masterclass in balance, dignity, and human connection. She leaves behind a world richer for her presence, a Hollywood landscape forever shaped by a woman who refused to compromise her values, who loved without spectacle, and who defined true loyalty and grace for generations to come. Even in a world obsessed with spectacle, Barbara Hale's story proves something timeless, that the deepest power comes not from attention, but from authenticity, that the loudest echoes are often quiet ones, and that a life lived with love, loyalty, and integrity will always be remembered long after the cameras stop rolling.